Well, the first round of the NFL draft is in the books. I'm joined by Rick Butler from Rocky Top Insider. And there was one Vol drafted in that first round. 26 overall by the Atlanta Falcons. It was James Pearce Jr.'s. Initial thoughts of that pick?
I think this is a great landing spot for James Pearce Jr. And it was funny, going into Thursday night's first round, we didn't really know what was going to happen. We didn't know if it was going to be a second round fall for James Pearce or if he was going to stay in that first round. The Atlanta Falcons decided to trade up, move to the 26th overall pick, and select James Pearce Jr. But it's not only that. The Falcons also got Jalen Walker, an edge rusher from Georgia. This is now a tandem of SEC players that they're bringing in. I think that Walker and Pearce both are going to revolutionize that Falcons line, but I love this landing spot for James Pearce Jr.
They really needed some edge help there in Atlanta, and they got two of them. How do those two pair up with each other?
Well, I like what they bring in. I like what the Falcons did by bringing in two guys who are very productive at the SEC level, but they did it in a little bit of a different ways. Going back to the draft special that you and I did a couple days ago, we talked about how James Pearce Jr. was such an explosive player, a guy who could really use his first step to beat offensive linemen right there. Jalen Walker, on the other hand, maybe a little bit more physical, maybe a little bit more of a guy looking for leverage, looking to use his strength a little bit. So I think when you're talking about James Pearce Jr. and Jalen Walker, you're talking about two guys who can really get after the quarterback, but they do it in unique enough ways that I think that offensive lines are going to have to sort of handle them differently in terms of their play style and what they're going to do.
The Falcons traded up for James Pearce Jr. They gave up a 2026 first-round pick. Was it worth it is the real question.
Well, obviously that is to be seen, but you're right. They did give up an arm and a leg, giving up a first-round pick in order to slide back into the first round to get James Pearce Jr. Look, the way that I see it, you've got two first-round picks in 2 years, but if you've got a plan, if you've got something that you want to do, something that you want to go out and accomplish. The Falcons for many years have been talked about as having a defensive line that hasn't been too impactful. If they had a plan to come into this draft and make an impact on that line, then I love it. Go ahead and use a little bit of draft capital later on. Go ahead and make a little bit of a risk to get this guy on your team. Again, a little aggressive. We'll see how it works, but I love the move that the Falcons made.
Pearce was asked about what he's going to bring to the Atlanta Falcons. His response is in true James Pearce fashion.
Just making plays on the defensive side of the ball. A dog mentality, just ready to get to it, ready to prove it. We talked about it long enough now.
We've talked about it long enough now. What are your thoughts on that right there?
Well, certainly he has been talked a lot about this offseason and just sort of in the road to the draft. Even in the last year, Reece, I know you and I talked about this before the 2024 season. James Pearce Jr. was potentially a top 5 pick in the draft. Now, obviously, through the course of the year, he did slide back to that number 26 spot, but he has been one of the more polarizing players because of his extreme talent on the field, mixed in with a little bit of off-the-field questions that people have had. Maybe one of the reasons for that slide to the 20s, but he has been a very talked-about player, not just here in Knoxville and East Tennessee, but certainly in the NFL world in general.
So James Pearce is off the board now. We enter day 2. A couple of Vols are in contention for being selected here. You got Dylan Samson. He's the one that everyone in Vol Nation is talking about because he put up record-breaking numbers. He's likely a 3rd or 4th round pick. If he does go in that 3rd round, that would be on Friday. Where do you see him going?
You know, I'm pretty optimistic on where Dylan Samson is going to go, Tennessee's resident historic running back. I saw a mock draft prediction coming out today, Friday morning, that was saying that he might even be able to sneak into late in the 2nd round. Now, I do think that might be a bit lofty, might be a bit high expectations. So for me, I'm going to go he's a 3rd round running back. Not only is this a deep class for running backs, but I think that there's going to start to be a run on them coming up soon, early here in these 2nd, 3rd, 4th rounds. So Dylan Samson is a very talented running back in this class. He can do a lot for an NFL franchise, and he's a very talented player. I see Dylan Samson being a 3rd round draft pick, maybe sneaking up to the 2nd round, but probably not falling back to the 4th. But who knows? We'll see how everything shakes out.
How have you seen the perception of running backs change? Because we did see Ashton Jeanty get picked fairly early in this draft. How have you seen it change? Because initially it was like you never waste your 1st round picks on a running back, but now that's slowly changing. And how is Samson going to fit into that fold?
I remember going back to the 2016 draft, and I believe Ezekiel Elliott was taken by the Dallas Cowboys, and that was one of the last big names, at least I can remember off the top of my head, of those running backs who went in the early picks. I think the NFL is shifting back into, hey, we believe that a running back can do a lot of different things for this offense, not just a ball you can hand the ball, or not just a guy you can hand the ball off to. You look at a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs last year with Detroit, his ability not only in the running game but in the receiving game as well. These guys are just such weapons. And I think their bodies, coming out of college, it's the best it's ever going to get, right? It's like buying a new car off the lot. Obviously, as you drive that thing around a little bit, it's going to depreciate. But these guys are in prime position coming out of college. I think that teams are seeing that, recognizing that, and ready to go ahead and make the move.
Last question on Dylan Samson. What is the special ability he's going to bring to the NFL that these NFL teams should be salivating over?
Absolutely. Well, he is a relentless running back, and I think that was maybe evidenced. I can't remember what game it was, but I know you remember it well. That touchdown he had where it took all 11 guys on offense to get him into the end zone, I believe from the quarterback to the wide receiver to the offensive line, they got him there. He is a relentless running back, a relentless player. I think that's going to be something that the NFL teams are going to be infatuated in seeing, but he's also just very talented, man. His breakaway speed, his ability to change directions, and I think that we're going to see in this next level that he's a better receiver than we might have seen here at Tennessee.
Another guy that could go in this second day is Omar Norman, another defensive guy, another defensive line, this time defensive tackle.
Yeah.
Where do you see him going? Because he's projected third or fourth round. Some guys even have him going in the second round, but that might be a little lofty. Where do you see him fit?
Little bit lofty for the second round pick, at least the way that I see things shaking out. But ultimately, I do think that Omar Norman, Tennessee's other great defensive lineman, I do think that he's going to land in a third round pick. Now, it might be with one of those last picks in the third round, maybe sneaks into the early in the fourth round, but he is a really talented player who has a relentless motor on the defensive line. Those guys are obviously a coach's dream. Guys who can get after the ball carrier, guys who can get after the quarterback, guys who are just going to be a menace to the offensive line. That's what Omar Norman is. So I do see him I see his game and his style being enough to convince a coaching staff that, you know what, let's go ahead, let's lock this in. To me, a third round draft pick on Friday night.
What's the peak for Omar Norman after he gets drafted in the third or fourth round or wherever? What's the peak of his NFL career?
That's a great question. I think that for Omar Norman, maybe it's not going to be superstar status. Maybe it's not going to be all these Pro Bowls. But if he can be a consistent player on a defensive line, look, we know how important the trenches are for these NFL teams. We know that that's where these offenses and defense, that's where they live and die. That's where everything gets going. I think if he can stick around and just be a consistent force, a guy who is a staple in the locker room, a guy who does his job and knows what he's doing, like we saw at times at Tennessee, again, for me, it's about consistency. I think that's the way for him to make a long career here in the NFL.
He's probably the last one picked today. He might even slip down to the third day, but is there anyone else you could possibly see sneaking into that second day range? Dante Thornton, one of those guys, anybody like that?
Well, I think you're right. I think ultimately we've talked about the two guys who are likely going to be Friday candidates for Tennessee here in the NFL draft. But you mentioned the fun name that people are talking about, Dante Thornton, Tennessee's wide receiver prospect going into the draft. I saw somebody talk about him in the way of, yes, he might be a one-trick pony, but boy, is that one trick a lot of fun. So we'll see. Is that enough? Is his breakaway speed, is his deep threat catching ability enough to make somebody maybe overreach a little bit? I don't know if it's going to be an overreach, but I do think that Dante Thornton is going to get drafted at some point on Saturday. Don't quite know if it's going to be on Friday, though.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Rick. A couple guys to keep an eye out for on Friday are Omar Norman and Dylan Samson. James Pearce already been drafted. And then you got Saturday, Dante Thornton in there, maybe Brew McCoy, and then who knows who else might get selected. But thank you so much, Rick.
Absolutely.